In today's episode, we interview Valerie Smith, Director of Road Safety Programs at Parachute, about the evolution of road safety initiatives, particularly concerning youth engagement and systematic approaches to safer mobility. Valerie discusses her decade-long experience at Parachute and her dual role as president of the Canadian Association for Road Safety. We discuss the shift from focusing on individual driver behavior to a holistic, system-based approach to road safety.
We're really starting to look more specifically at the systems, how the roads are built, how policies are made that impact our roads, how they're enforced. And instead of only focusing on that individual behavior change piece, we're starting to look a little more holistically at our road safety culture.
We also discuss the need for meaningful youth engagement and harm reduction models.
Fear tactics, while they have a short-term impact on young people, they don't have a long-term impact and they do not work. If you want young people to walk away and actually be impacted by what we were trying to teach them, then we need to move away from that fear tactic model, because they will look at messaging that is bloody and loud and scary, and they will see it and then they will remove themselves and think that will never happen to me. And that is how a youth mind works.
Welcome to YD Drives the Future, a podcast where we cover all aspects of driver education and road safety. For over 50 years, Young Drivers of Canada has been dedicated to educating drivers of all skill levels and changing their driving behaviors for the safety of all road users. Let's jump into today's episode. Welcome to the YD Drives the Future podcast. Today, my guest is Valerie Smith, the Director of Road Safety Programs at Parachute. Today, we're going to chat a little bit about road safety and youth movements to advocate for road safety. Hi, Valerie. It's been a while since we've had a conversation.
Yeah, hi. Nice to see you and talk to you. Thanks for having me.
Welcome to YD Drives the Future. So tell me a little bit about your background at Parachute and your involvement with road safety programs, say, over, the last decade or so.
Sure. So I've been with Parachute, which is a national charity dedicated to injury prevention, and I've been overseeing our road safety and safe mobility programs for 10 plus years. Prior to my work with Parachute, I was working with an organization called Smart Risk that was very focused on injury prevention specifically for youth. So I'm the director, as you mentioned, and I'm also the president of the Canadian Association for Road Safety Professionals. So I wear both those hats.
Very nice. So has road safety from an initiative point of view, has it changed over the years?
Yeah, so generally that's a loaded question. There's lots of ways it's changed. We've certainly seen a reduction in serious injuries and fatalities over the last decade. There's still lots of work to do. There's still way too many people getting seriously injured and killed on our roads, but we have seen a reduction. As you likely know, there's different issues affecting our road user behavior, and something we've seen a real rise in is distracted driving, especially with texting. So I would say if I had to speak to a specific behavior of a driver, it would be speed is certainly still a very big issue, as well as distracted. Another area I've seen a big change is previously in our road safety world, and even our work at Parachute, we very much focused on the individual and the individual's behavior choices and decisions. And while that is still absolutely important, we've also seen a real shift in how we think about road safety. And at Parachute, as well as in the road safety sector, we're really starting to look more specifically at the systems, how the roads are built, how policies are made that impact our roads, how they're enforced. And instead of only focusing on that individual behavior change piece, we're starting to look a little more holistically at our road safety culture.
And do you think that the general public that uses our roads, whether they be automobile drivers or commercial drivers or cyclists, pedestrians, scooters, the entire range of road users. Do you think that their attitude to safety has changed or evolved in a positive or negative direction?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and while I can't speak to the general population, we have done some national surveys, and what we have found in those surveys, just spotlighting a certain demographic of the population, is that many drivers understand and see the issues that are happening on our roads. They are angered and annoyed by texting and driving and speeding, yet they're also accountable in these behaviors. So many of our drivers that are out there on the road, they think they are not actually active in making those poor choices themselves, but when they think about it, they admit that they are. So we're facing a bit of a contradiction in how people perceive their own behaviors on the road.
So that's almost a bit of an oxymoron, isn't it? It's like, do as I say, but you know what? I'm going to do it too, sort of deal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's human nature to some extent, but I think the more we start to reflect on what other people are doing, then the more we start to see it in ourselves. So yeah, so our work is really about shifting the conversation and shifting the discourse about let's not try to get from one side of the city to the next as fast as we can, but let's do it in the safest way possible and think about who else is using the roads.
Do you find that different age demographics approach that driving philosophy differently? I mean, my work has predominantly been with the new driver segment, and um, speed is one of the things that is very intriguing to them. Um, but I'm just wondering, is it a new driver thing? Is it a veteran driver thing? Like, is the messaging different to different age demographics?
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I think we all engage in unsafe driving behavior, and we all have been accountable to making poor choices while behind the wheel. I think the biggest point is our messaging towards young drivers and passengers in the cars with young drivers. It needs to be very different than our messaging towards even older young drivers or adults. I mean, at different life stages, the way we communicate with people needs to change. Um, and certainly, young drivers are new to driving. That we know the graduated driver's licensing has certainly helped them almost be enforced to make better decisions, especially when it comes to having multiple people in the car, being aware of distractions and
Hmm.
speeding. Um, but there's also what we found at Parachute with a lot of the research we've done on young people is there's a real need to shift how we think and how we engage with youth from the previous ways where we would talk to youth and tell them how they had to behave. And there was a certain element of victim blaming when it came to youth. We were labeling them as the cause of unsafe roads. And we really have found that the best way to engage with young people is to start to empower them, engage them, and listen to them. And they're telling us how they want to be engaged with when it comes to road safety.
And what are some of their preferences for engagement? What are they telling you? What works for them?
Yeah, so there's a number of different principles that have come out of some of our research, and I'll just give you a little context. So, about 2 years ago, we were provided with funding from Transport Canada to really take a deep dive into the mind of young people. And understanding young people aren't one entity, they're diverse, they're different, they have different needs. We developed a Canadian Youth Road Safety Council. So we had a large number of young people between 15 and 24 that were representative of different areas of the country, representing urban, rural, different languages. And one of our coordinators worked with this group for 2 years to start to try to understand again how their mind worked when it came to road safety and mobility. And so what came out of that is a really good framework for anyone working with youth in road safety or not. And a few key elements are, one is meaningful youth engagement. So that's a loaded word. It can mean a lot of things, but what we heard from young people is they want to be engaged directly. They want their voices to be heard, and they want to be involved in anything that has to do with young people. And they felt that for too long, organizations, public health workers, police have been talking to them rather than with them. So that's a big piece. Another really important piece for your audience is what we refer to in public health as the harm reduction lens. So the harm reduction lens really moves away from an abstinence-only model, and it recognizes that young people will partake in certain behaviors. And we can use the driving under the influence as an example. So a harm reduction model in road safety education is going to focus on the consequences of impaired driving, the benefits of not making those choices as a young driver, rather than the idea that young people should not be drinking alcohol. So we really need, as adults, regardless of how we feel about alcohol or drug use, we need to approach this type of behavior in a very different way.
That's a very that's a very different standpoint than a lot of the messaging from, I mean, I've been in the driver training world for, 35, 36 years. And, back in the early days of my career, a lot of it was, scare them, right? Give them information that is going to scare the pants off them so that they never, ever want to partake in this behavior. And it was almost like a head in the sand attitude, that you're not old enough, so you shouldn't be partaking in, things that would affect your behavior negatively behind the wheel. And, it's almost refreshing to sort of have the real life conversations that sooner or later you may find yourself in this situation. And now you need to make the best decision for you about what to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where I think the whole behavior change model has changed, as I spoke about earlier. And there is actual evidence that has come out of the public health approach to education that fear tactics, while they have a short-term impact on young people, they don't have a long-term impact, and they do not work. So if you want a shock factor and you want to engage an audience for a discussion, then that fear messaging can be impactful. If you want young people to walk away and actually be, impacted by what we were trying to teach them, then we need to move away from that fear tactic model, because they disconnect from it. They will look at
Right.
messaging that is bloody and loud and scary, and they will see it, and then they will remove themselves and think that will never happen to me. And that is how a
Right.
youth mind works.
Yep. 9 lives, cone of protection, whatever you want to call it, right? I'm good. This is not going to happen to me. I can do this. Do you think that youth are more engaged today with, certain safety initiatives than they were, say a decade or more ago? Like, because, we made this shift to a positive engagement opportunities as opposed to speaking at them. Um, are they saying more?
Yeah, so that's a hard question to answer, and it's interesting because we are coming out of that time of COVID where young people were, hidden away in their homes for a significant amount of time, and a lot of the momentum we made at Parachute with engaging young people was lost because
Yep.
many of them weren't in schools, which is
Yeah.
where we do a lot of our work. And what we found and what has really been a game changer is in order to continue to reach young people during that time with any health promotion message, even around the pandemic, was we had to go to social media and we had to find youth where they were at. And
Right.
So that has really helped to shift our way of thinking as well. And it came up loud and clear with our Road Safety Council is where young people are getting their messages from. And, they're getting it from TikTok, as you know, they're getting it from YouTube. They're getting it online. And so we are starting to go there to try to advocate and to build engagement amongst young people. And only just recently have we started some of our grassroots program again, where we're working with young people in person. And we're very much trying at Parachute to employ everything that came out of that youth engagement and youth advocacy research. So again,
Right.
how are we engaging youth meaningfully? How are we using a harm reduction model? Again, not ignoring the fact that young people are taking in some of these behaviors. How do we keep them safe? And the other big piece that we think will encourage and engage more youth is looking at how we're factoring in inclusion, accessibility, things like equity. So, as I mentioned earlier, youth are not one monolithic entity. They are different.
Right.
There's so many different needs. There's equity issues, there's gender issues, there's every young person is so different. So we really need to look at how do we respect that and how do we engage with these different groups in a unique way, because they are all perceiving and taking in our messaging differently.
Has there been any youth movements with regard to road safety that a section of the say student population, thinking back to the days of even early young drivers, where one of the first public relations um, situations that young drivers was in was um, um, outside of an LCBO, advocating against drinking and driving. I mean, that was back in the early 1970s. And, then we ended up with mothers at MADD, and then we had students against driving drunk, and, we had OSED, and, we had a lot of those chapters again that were very focused on um, being in the schools when the students were there. Has there been anything that has uh, sort of materialized, either during the pandemic or post-pandemic, that takes that voice into sort of an online forum so that, it can be bigger and more powerful, because now we're not limited to the classroom, but now we're in, the world of the internet. So we can engage people from across the world.
Yeah, so I think it's a really interesting situation we're in currently. I do believe that, and again, I'm only speaking anecdotally. I'm sure there's young people all across Canada who are part of Mothers Against Drunk Driving groups and Students Against Drunk Driving and various other groups who are still very active. What I've noticed a big shift in my work with youth engagement um, is the interest of young people not only in safe driving, but in general mobility, safe mobility. So we know that young people are impacted by road collisions in many different ways. And we also know that there's many young people out there that don't have access to vehicles. And they're getting around urban spaces and rural spaces on bikes and e-scooters and various other modes. And
Right.
I'm starting to see in my work, at least, is an interest with young people on safe mobility. They want to be able to get around their cities outside of vehicles using public transit and being safe on public transit, especially from a gender perspective. They want to ride their bikes to school and not
Mm-hmm.
be pushed off the road. They want separated bike lanes. They want safe pedestrian routes. And, I'm not sure if it's the circle I'm in right now in the road safety sector, where whereas I said, it's really expanding beyond just drivers, and it's really starting to look at what are the rights of people outside of vehicles in terms of them getting around the cities and their rural areas as well. A lot of those young people are starting to mobilize, certainly online. There's a number of not only forums in Canada, but in North America and globally, where young people are starting to demand safe, equitable access to all modes of transport.
It almost goes back, I don't know how many years it would be when the message of share the road came out. And it's almost like this is now share the road squared, right? And now it's not only limited to behavior, but there's demands for infrastructure that promotes safe road use between different types of users, right? The vehicles versus the cars, the e-bikes versus the pedal bikes, the scooters versus anything that has two wheels, right? And add to that the whole focus on green initiatives, being environmentally friendly. I think that's where we're seeing a big a big change, is that it's not all about driving a car anymore. But you're right, it's about getting from point A to point B in an economical and in a responsible and a safe way.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And again, the role of the driver is so absolutely important in both of these situations, right? In terms of, keeping and ensuring that drivers are making the best decisions to not only keep themselves and their occupants safe, but how are they keeping, that mother and her child crossing the road safe. And so coming back to your context and the young driver is, it's absolutely important to make sure and support the young drivers in making those decisions. But at the same time, how are we keeping drivers and non-drivers safe on our roads by making sure our infrastructure is protecting them, by making sure we have those separated lanes where people can walk and cycle, as well as a whole array of other infrastructural and built environment resources.
Gosh, even just some maintenance things that we want to share the road with the cyclist. And as a longtime driving instructor, I noticed the fact that the concrete curb has a multi-centimeter gap between it and where the pavement is. Well, a cyclist can't ride there. And so they need more of the driving lane. And as an observant driver, I'm respectful of the space that the cyclist needs. But how many other drivers are paying attention to things like that would afford other road users just that little bit of a barrier of safety?
Yeah, I mean, those are all variables we have to think about. And I think at the end of the day, what I've started learning, even in the last few years, is all the connections between road safety, sustainability. So I'm going to put my urban hat on for a moment. When I'm driving in the city, especially in Toronto, we know how bad congestion can be. And, I often applaud, if I'm driving in my car from A to B, I applaud those people that are cycling and that are, at times taking their lives at risk to get from A to B on their bicycle. And then I think, that's one less car on the road. The air quality is better around the parks where my daughter is playing. And the roads are safer because we've got less cars. And, so to me, it all makes sense that we really start to think about how we do share the roads the best we can. And as a driver, just remind ourselves that it's a good thing that we've got different people out there using different modes of transport, and we all have to practice safe behaviors. And as a planner, we have to think about how are we ensuring that people outside of their cars or people who don't have access to cars are being given that right to safe and equal access.
I like it. And I think that, as we move forward, the idea is that no road user group is more or less important than the next one, that we have to find avenues of cooperation between, and we need to respect each other and our needs and the different needs of the different road users. And we all have to live happily ever after. And, that attitude in itself will lead to more proactive decisions, right? Leaving a little bit of extra room when the concrete curb and the pavement are several centimeters apart, or not driving directly beside a cyclist when there's a giant puddle coming up. Or being aware of the mom and the baby carriage that might be crossing the street at a bit of a slower pace, or being aware of the e-bike that might travel a little bit faster speed-wise than a pedal bike. But at the same time, if the e-bike driver or the pedal bike driver or the mom with the baby carriage or the person on the non-e-bike, if they're not aware of each other and also making smart, conscientious, and safe decisions, then the whole system falls apart.
That's right. That's right. And in an ideal world, as a forever optimist, if those separated lanes are built properly, and we are actually differentiating and separating cars from non-car traffic, meaning the pedestrians and the cyclists and so forth. Even if those each side of the equation, if they make mistakes, if any of those people make a bad decision, there's ways they can be protected by how we've built our roads. So again, I know that's very much a Vision Zero philosophy that as you know, believes no one should be killed or seriously injured on our roads.
Right.
But that's what we're talking about when we talk about these bigger systemic changes. It's people are going to make mistakes, and the mom with her baby carriage, she could maybe perhaps not look both ways or cross when she doesn't have enough time to cross. But how are the roads being built to also protect and help mitigate the impact of those decisions when they are made poorly?
I think culturally, the focus has always been, but it's not my fault, right? That there's been a really big, and I don't know how much this has changed in terms of, well, if that bad incident happens, it wasn't my fault. And I've always taken, and young drivers is very big on this position, that a lot of bad things happen to really good people when the situation they were involved in wasn't their fault. And if I had one big wish for how to take us 10 steps closer to Vision Zero, it would be that we need to think about what we're doing in terms of safety rather than whose fault it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it's the victim blaming conundrum. It's the blaming conundrum in general. We need to move away from who made the mistake and think about how, as you said earlier, how we can all share the roads together and move away, I think, from a road safety culture that has traditionally been driver and vehicle focused to
Right.
one that accepts that the culture of our roads is changing, the culture of our urban spaces is changing. People are more concerned about air quality. People are more concerned about staying active, getting outside, moving about the city in an active way. And because of all these shifts in how we're using our roads, we need to start thinking about how we can make it work for everyone. And certainly there's not a big place for blame in that.
So if you had, if you could wave a magic wand and, you had three wishes and your three wishes would take us leaps and bounds toward, the Vision Zero destination, what would they be? What are three things that you would magically put into place that would take us steps toward a much more safe what am I thinking about here? A safer, a safer environment for all road users. That's where I'm going.
Mhm. So I guess to make 2 and 3 work, I think my number one would be um, not just an acknowledgement, but a recognition and acceptance that, as I said, that our roads are changing and that we do need to change our driver mentality. I'm a driver, so I'm not pointing fingers. We need to change our
Yeah.
driver mentality to embrace the benefits that other road users bring to the table.
Hmm.
Um, and this has to be a public, not just recognition, but outcry. We have to recognize how many people, vulnerable road users, are getting killed on our roads in Canada every year,
Yep.
and we need to do something about it. So I would say that public advocacy, public acceptance, and just shaking ourselves a little bit to recognize as Canadians that we do not find any loss of life on our roads acceptable. By having that public engagement and that public buy-in, we're going to start to be able to encourage policy changes at municipal, provincial, territorial, federal levels that
Right.
support big systemic changes in how we build new roads. And when we go to
Right.
repair roads, how are we repairing them? Let's
Yep.
not do the status quo. Let's really look at what is the evidence telling us. We know
Yep.
speed reduction works. We know speed is evidence-based. Bring down the speeds, especially in densely populated urban areas and certain highway areas where there's no separation. Bring down the speeds, we're going to save lives. So policy and
Right.
enforcement being prioritized. And that would lead into, all the cities around our country embracing, implementing a safe systems and Vision Zero approach when they do their road traffic safety plans. And right
Right.
now, there is it's a drop in the bucket of how many cities are actually implementing Vision Zero and safe systems in their mobility plans. So,
Right.
yeah, I think those would be my three ingredients in what I'd love to see.
And if I was gonna sum that up into a few words, it would be, changing attitudes, being very conscious of the role that speed plays in negative outcomes when different road users intermix. And then let's just build things the right way so that there's built-in safeguards for all different road users.
Yeah, that's right. And again, coming back to that Vision Zero principle is no loss of life is acceptable, and we really need to start to advocate for that.
Val, this has just been an amazing discussion. We're here today with Valerie Smith, the Director of Road Safety Programs at Parachute. We've gone from, we've gone through the decades with regard to road safety, the past, the present, and the future, how youth are now engaged. Thank you so much for being our guest today, Valerie. I do look forward to another opportunity to take this conversation one step further. Maybe we can come back in a year and see if anything has changed.
Absolutely, and thanks so much for having me. I feel like we could have kept talking all afternoon, but thanks.
I
Thanks
know, I
again.
know, I know
Yeah.
exactly. We're both very passionate about this entire subject. Thanks again, Valerie.
Thank you.